Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to those of you joining me on TV, DAB and online. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. On the show, I'll be posing the question, should primary school students be taught about misogyny and sexism? Well, the London Mayor thinks they should. I'll be speaking to a whole host of guests about this very issue. But first now, it's the time for the news with Simon Pusey.
Good afternoon, it's just gone 2 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's presidential advisor says front lines have practically frozen because Russia doesn't have enough troops to make further advances. Meanwhile, Mariupol City Council says thousands of Ukrainians have been taken by force across the border to Russia. An art school in the city where around 400 people were taking shelter has also been bombed. There's no word yet on casualties, but the City Council confirmed that the building was destroyed, adding there were victims under the rubble. President Zelensky described the horror of the attack in an address to the nation.
The blockade of Mariupol will go down in history of responsibility for war crimes. To do what the occupiers did to a peaceful city is a terror that will be remembered for centuries to come. And the more Ukrainians tell the world about it, the more support we find. The more Russia uses terror against Ukraine, the worse the consequences will be for it.
The Prime Minister is urging China to join the global community in its disapproval of the war in Ukraine. Boris Johnson believes some of President Xi Jinping's team is having second thoughts about Beijing's neutral position on the invasion. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is also facing fierce criticism after comparing the struggle of Ukrainians fighting Russian forces to Britons voting for Brexit. Here's what he said at the Tory party spring conference yesterday.
And I know that it's the instinct of the people of this country, like the people of Ukraine, to choose freedom every time. When the British people voted for Brexit in such large numbers, I don't believe it was because they were remotely hostile to foreigners. It's because they wanted to be free, to do things differently, and for this country to be able to run itself.
6 people have been killed and 10 others seriously injured after a car ploughed into a crowd in Belgium. The incident happened in a small village about 30 miles south of the capital, Brussels. Police say the vehicle was driven at high speeds into a group of carnival performers who were preparing for a parade. 2 people have been arrested. The incident is not thought to be terror-related. A member of the carnival troupe says the day was a disaster.
It was supposed to be a celebration day, but it turned out to be a tragedy. A car drove into the procession. We saw bodies flying everywhere. It was horrible.
Police have named the teenager who was murdered in central London yesterday. 19-year-old Sabita Tawani was found with serious neck injuries at a student accommodation in Clerkenwell. Detectives are now searching for 22-year-old Meher Marouf, who they believe was in a relationship with her. Police say he's a Tunisian national, but he's not a student and has no fixed address. Millions of people in England will begin to be offered COVID booster jabs this week. The NHS says the vaccine will be available to care home residents, those over 75 and immunosuppressants aged 12 and over. 5 million people are expected to be given the jab. Government ministers reportedly knew P&O Ferries' plan to slash 800 jobs before staff members were told. The Sunday Times says it received a leaked memo from a senior Whitehall official trying to justify the redundancies by saying without these decisions, an estimated 2,200 staff would likely lose their jobs. According to the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, the replacement workforce will be on contracts which pay below the minimum wage. A funeral has been held for the Australian cricket legend Shane Warne. Family and friends, including retired Australian Test captain Mark Taylor and former England skipper Michael Vaughan, attended a private service in Melbourne. The 52-year-old died just over 2 weeks ago while on holiday in Thailand. A post-mortem found he died of natural causes. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will learn about efforts to preserve Belize's barrier reef as they continue their Caribbean tour. William and Kate spent time with the country's Prime Minister on day 2 of their 8-day trip, marking the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Their visit hasn't been without controversy, though, with some residents protesting against the royal couple's arrival and helicopter landing site. And a toy company in Chicago has raised over £110,000 for Ukraine by selling President Zelensky Lego figurines. The unofficial Zlego toys went on sale with a price tag of £75 and sold out within just a few hours. All funds from the sales will go towards medical aid for Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Thank you very much for your company. Here's what's coming up on the show in the next hour. Should children be given lessons on misogyny and sexism? The Mayor of London has said that they should be, and he's called on these lessons to actually teach us about violence against women and tackling that issue. Sadiq Khan, launching this campaign, said it's to challenge sexist attitudes and inappropriate behaviours and urged men to take a stand against misogyny. I don't know about you, but I didn't need lessons to teach me that. Your thoughts, as always, please. Do you think children as young as 4 need to learn about this? We'll also be talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says she's ready to trigger Article 16 of that protocol before the Northern Ireland elections. The world first online safety laws were introduced in Parliament this week. New measures include tougher and quicker criminal sanctions for tech bosses and new criminal offences for falsifying and destroying data. I'll be asking whether or not these measures were needed at all and whether actually they go far too far. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts. Should children be given lessons on misogyny and sexism? Tweet me at GBNews or email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget about Facebook. Loads of fantastic content on our page. Cheers very much. Now, in a speech to the Conservative Party's spring conference yesterday, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had this to say.
Now is the time to end the culture of self-doubt, the constant self-questioning and introspection, the ludicrous debates about languages, statues and pronouns. Our history, warts and all, is what makes us what we are today.
I couldn't agree with the Foreign Secretary more. This, to me, folks, is no clearer than in our education system, right? These days, almost every responsibility that you would have perhaps reasonably assumed was that of the parent is now expected of the state. Most parents today, right, seem to believe it's the role of the state to teach their children to read and write, not their own. According to polling by the Royal Foundation set up by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, that's Will and Kate to me and you, I'm afraid I've to disagree fundamentally on any parent that thinks that. I think if we accept, though, that this is the reality, this is where we are, perhaps it's understandable that schools have moved beyond teaching our kids just about reading and writing and instead, I think, focus too much on whackery and wokery. We saw, didn't we, the painful reality of what it means to close our schools in today's society. Kids are just left without anything. Kids have been harder hit than anybody else, as well as taking little Martha or Arthur to the opticians instead of your parent. Little Martha or Arthur is now taught a dose of left-wing ideology for good measure too, folks. London Mayor Sadiq Khan launched a campaign last week to give children lessons on misogyny in primary schools, kids as young as the age of 4, saying we've got to start in primary schools in relation to relationship education for boys. The Have a Word campaign is to tackle violence against women, which we can all get behind. But really, is this the way to go about it? I don't know about you, but I didn't learn about misogyny at school, and I don't hate women, right? I certainly don't think it's all right to be violent towards women. How patronising, how utterly condescending, how indicative of a society that's moving against men in such a shameless fashion. This is just another attempt to me to inject wokeness into the classroom. How about Sadiq Khan focuses instead on the plague of knife crime on his streets instead of this nonsense in classrooms? We saw Tory MP Miriam Cates in a question to the Schools Minister just last week, raising really important questions on adults pushing agendas and ideology in schools, something the government has said it's keen to stamp out. Only it hasn't done in the area of gender ideology, in which we have kids being taught about things like there are more than two sexes, that sex isn't binary, that if you feel as though you don't conform to gender stereotypes, you might be experiencing gender dysphoria, be transgender, and therefore identify as the opposite sex. All, in my opinion, pretty out there for kids to be hearing in the classroom. But it gets worse than that. Miriam raised some worrying anecdotes about schools that are transitioning pupils against their parents' wishes, and worse than that, frankly, without their parents' knowledge, convincing these kids that the solution to their problems is through this gender ideology, when actually these kids could be gay, they could be autistic, they could be vulnerable children, there could be a plethora of reasons, a whole list of things other than experiencing gender dysphoria. In my day, right, it used to be called growing up. It used to be called adolescence. It used to be called puberty. All of these things in which you find out who you are, what the world's about, and growing up being an adult. Kids ought to be able to do that, as they have throughout history, throughout the history of the human race, right? Where we've done it naturally and organically, without the pushing of ideology by adults onto them. Kids need to learn about maths and English, not about how Arthur could be Martha and how Martha's right to use the school changing room without Arthur being in there is somehow transphobic, or how Arthur is going to grow up and beat and oppress Martha. It's just so wrong. But this stuff is everywhere. And if a Conservative party with such a massive majority can't stamp it out, then who can? Ultimately, nice words by Liz Truss that were heard at the start there, but isn't it time, folks, for some action? As I say, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has launched a campaign to challenge sexist attitudes and to urge men to take a stand against misogyny. He said primary school pupils who start school at 4 years old should be taught about misogyny as part of his campaign to implement change. Folks, I'm sure most of you agree that sexist attitudes and misogyny are wrong, but is this the right way to go about tackling the issue? Well, to speak more about this, I'm joined by Gareth Sturdy, a former teacher and education advisor, and Tony Breslin, who's the chair of governors at Bushy Primary Education and author of Lessons from Lockdown. There are a fair few of those we could learn, I think. Gareth, can we start with you, please? Where do you actually stand on this?
Well, I think that lessons on misogyny for primary school pupils aren't just a crazy idea. They're actually quite dangerous, because I think, you know, for both sexes, for boys, they give the idea that somehow ordinary playground attitudes, you know, sometimes calling people names, things like that, is actually due to a far worse thing inside them. Like there's a sort of monster inside them waiting to break out, you know, which is just not the case. But also, how must it be for young girls to be thinking, oh, all the boys in my class, all the guys that I meet in the world are actually potential threats to me? I think that is not a way to empower young women, particularly at this really young age.
Yeah, Gareth, I couldn't agree more. Tony, how do you feel about this?
Mythology going on here. I'm chair of governors at an infant and a primary school, as you've said. I've worked in primary and secondary education throughout my career. I just simply don't find these cases. There may be one or two that make the headlines, but it's the responsibility of schools to offer a broad and balanced curriculum. It's also the responsibility of schools to ensure that children get key messages about what is right and what is wrong. Now, it's also the job of parents, but the truth is that not every child benefits from the same stability of family background. There are a whole range of things that actually schools level the playing field in for children, and I think we have much healthier attitudes towards girls, between boys and girls, towards people of colour, and so on today, as a result of quite a lot of the work that we would have called loony 20 years ago. The world is changing. We have to ensure that our young people are ready and resilient to attitudes. We've seen some of the awful cases in the last year, and all we're doing is ensuring that children have that. That's not about lessons in misogyny, but it's about making sure that through our curriculum and so forth, we cover a range of experiences and a range of values.
Well,
but
Tony,
the idea that
Tony, did you have that when you were at school? Did you have lessons on misogyny?
No, I didn't.
So are you a misogynist?
No, I'm not. But I tell you what,
See, it's as simple as that, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's not. Let me finish, Darren. The fact of the matter is, I grew up in a world where girls got far fewer opportunities than boys as a result of their education. So we have changed things, and we are changing things. Of course, most children are not predisposed to these views in the home and elsewhere. But occasionally where they emerge, it's absolutely right that they should be challenged in the school. But we're not talking about a whole curriculum dominated by this. We're just talking about drawing out themes that, you know, a lot of primary school reading, etc., is fundamentally moral about right and wrong. So,
Gareth,
This is what the mayor tried to do when he was interviewed about the proposals. He tried to say, look, you know, this is just about people having respect for each other, people being nice to each other. But actually, if you go on the website, the Have a Word campaign, and you look at the kind of things they're saying, they're talking about, you know, correcting problematic attitudes. They're talking about how name-calling in the playground can lead to misogyny later in life, that we can be misogynistic without realizing, you know, all these things, identifying phrases like drama queen or boys will be boys as misogynistic. You know, when you look at what the mayor is trying to do, this is not simply teaching young people how to have respect for each other, which schools have always done. This is about a particular type of ideology. And the mayor is very keen on grabbing them young. He said this when he launched the campaign. He said, you know, to prevent cases later in life, we need to get them when they're young. That's not his exact words, but that's a close paraphrase.
Yeah, which I think it absolutely, and we're moving much too far away, if you ask me, from the basic principles of what kids should be taught, right? Kids are far too often, I think, leaving schools without being equipped with the actual tools to go out there and make something of their lives. And far too often, I think, on the streets of London especially, kids are going out and stabbing each other on the streets, right? Never mind talking about these things like misogyny. And I think fundamentally, Gareth, you raised a really important point, which is that far too many kids are now being taught that society is fundamentally stacked against them. You've got young women who are going to grow up believing that the world is just inherently misogynistic. I'm sorry, but this is palpable nonsense, isn't it, Gareth?
I mean, I think it's very, very dangerous. I think that the best way to empower women is to get them to make the most of their own abilities and think, however, you know, whatever the world throws at me, I am going to be able to counter it. But telling them that the world is inherently dangerous is going to try and enact violence against them in the kind of systematic way that the term misogyny implies. I just think that's very dangerous. And what's most concerning about this for me is that, we saw the reaction, for example, of London police to the Sarah Everard vigil, not to mention the case of Sarah Everard herself, right? That is a problem that the London mayor could tackle, but he doesn't know how to. So what does he do? He's essentially picking on primary school children. What on earth does he think he's doing?
Tony, how do we make sure that this is age appropriate? Because surely you would accept that starting with children as young as 4 is very young.
Look, we teach children from the moment they walk through a school gate or a nursery gate between right and wrong. And right and wrong takes many guises. And nobody is talking here about, I'm not answerable for what the London mayor may or may not have said. And I'm not proposing, the kind of scary scenario that Gareth talks about. I just don't see that. But what I do see is an education system today that is far more on it in terms of saying exactly what Gareth's been saying to girls, saying to children from different backgrounds, you can make it too. Now, to actually, in a sense, a part of that is to make those children aware at some level that sometimes they might have to work a little bit harder, that sometimes they might need a bit more resilience. That's not telling them that the girls, that every male hates them. I don't think anybody, including the mayor, is proposing that. I'm certainly not. But what I want to ensure is that every child that passes through our school feels they're of equal value, feels they can get on, and feels they're equipped to do so.
Tony, you mentioned resilience there, building in resilience to our kids. If that was what we were talking about right now, I would be stood shoulder to shoulder with you. I'd be saying, you know what, Tony, you bang on the money there. That's excellent. I hope all kids are being taught that. But that's not what's happening here. What kids are being told is that society is stacked against them, that we are all fundamentally misogynistic, and that these kids need to be brought up not to be because their parents are, their grandparents are, when actually that's just risible nonsense. And this is a woke screen from the Mayor of London.
Well, look, I'm saying that the scenario that you put out there is just not happening. I would agree with you in terms of if we were doing that kind of thing in schools, it wouldn't be right. But this is about ensuring that all of our children grow up with the belief that they can make it whatever position they're in, and it's our job as educators to ensure that's the case.
Brilliant,
if we
folks.
Look at the statistics.
Thank you. That's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for your time. That was Gareth Sturdy, former teacher and education advisor, and Tony Breslin, who is the chair of governors at Bushy Primary Education. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says she's ready to trigger Brexit's the Northern Ireland Protocol's Article 16 before the elections in Northern Ireland. We'll speak to those after the break and find out about those really important issues.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry and clear for many, though it will chill off after sunset. Let's take a look at the details. Firstly, in the far southwest, there'll be some more cloud around here this evening, and perhaps even the odd spot of rain, but that cloud will keep temperatures up. Over to the east, and a clear, calmer end to the weekend, though in any rural areas it will start to feel pretty chilly around dusk. Moving back to the west, and in South Wales, there'll continue to be hardly a cloud in the sky tonight, chilly here as well. Next now to the Midlands, where you can see the odd spot of fog and mist developing this evening, but otherwise a clear and cool end to the day after a sunny-filled weekend. Now moving further east, and there will be more cloud across northeast England this evening, and in coastal areas a chance of some very light rain, though inland it will also be pretty chilly. Whizzing over to Scotland now, chilly here, especially in the breeze, but staying clear and dry for all, with some mistiness developing at low levels. Finally, we go to Northern Ireland, where it has been a little cloudier so far today, and this evening it will remain mostly cloudy, but that does mean it won't feel too cold. By Monday morning, temperatures will have dipped across the UK, so it will be a clear and crisp start to the week, and that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Anaya Falarin Iman, for the discussion every Sunday at 3 p.m. here. From big ideas to questions shaping the public conversation, we tackle the moral, cultural and political implications of news stories.
We need to share this conversation democratically.
It has become so toxic, this debate.
They relish this kind of discourse.
From fascinating guests to challenging ideas, you won't want to miss it. The discussion every Sunday at 3 p.m. here, GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's now 2:26 and we're going to focus on the Northern Ireland Protocol for the next 5 or so. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has said she's ready to trigger Article 16. But what does this mean? God, that rhymes. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. Joining me now is former Labour MP and independent peer, Kate Hoey. Kate, thank you very much for joining me now. Kate, could you just first of all give us a sort of brief outline of what this Northern Ireland Protocol is and how it's causing so much havoc?
Well, the Northern Ireland Protocol is part of the withdrawal agreement, and it was brought in and agreed to by Parliament, I think very reluctantly. I think a lot of MPs thought that it wasn't right. However, they wanted to get the withdrawal agreement through and Brexit done. And there was always a feeling that the protocol could be fixed afterwards. What it really does is actually makes, as far as we're concerned in Northern Ireland, Great Britain a third country, because we have been left in the European Union in its single market for almost all our trading arrangements, which means that every time the European Union makes a new rule in the future, we have to go along with it. And this has meant that they have introduced lots of ridiculous processes where goods coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland have to be checked, have to pay certification. And so a lot of businesses in Great Britain are saying, look, it's not worth our while sending to Northern Ireland. So we are now being treated extremely differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. In other words, we didn't leave. Brexit didn't, although we had the same ballot paper saying, do you want the United Kingdom to leave? Northern Ireland has basically stayed in. And even the Supreme Court just last week, where in the High Court in Belfast, where there was a legal action about the Act of Union, one of the justices said, Northern Ireland is now more in the European Union than in the United Kingdom. And of course, that raises the whole constitutional issue of how the Act of Union has been broken, and how the Belfast Agreement, which is where all the institutions were set up, like the Assembly, have also now been broken. And we're in a situation where Liz Truss really needs to get on with doing what is in the protocol, which says that if there are problems economically, societally, and other ways, then Article 16 can be invoked, and there has to be a complete look again at the protocol and how it's working.
Yeah, I mean, former Brexit Secretary Lord Frost has actually said that the poison, and that's his word, between the UK and the EU will actually remain if the protocol isn't renegotiated. But Kate, what impetus is there for the EU to actually do this at this time? Because a lot of people are saying, well, hang on a minute, if we do this right now, we will damage relations between the United Kingdom and the EU at a time when Europe, as a continent, needs to be united behind the response to the Ukrainian people.
Well, I actually think that it's a very important and good time to be invoking Article 16. I mean, the European Union supposedly cares about what's happening in Ukraine. It's a horrific situation. It's brought a lot of the EU countries, led by the UK, to do a lot of very, very good things. You know, the tiny problem of the European Union trying to protect its internal market, because that's what this is all about. We have a border in Northern Ireland with a country, the Republic of Ireland, that will still be in the European Union. And therefore, they want to protect anything coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland that might just happen to get over the border and go back into the EU. I mean, there's been some ridiculous examples of this where they wanted to stop certain types of sausages coming in, where olive oil wasn't. They were worried that olive oil was going to come from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and then somebody would take it over the border. All of this is ridiculous. And therefore, this is such a tiny aspect. And this is when the European Union should be saying, look, we've got a lot on our plate. This is just nonsense. And of course, we know why they don't want to do that. They're still trying to punish the United Kingdom for leaving. And that's as simple as that. And I'm afraid Liz Truss has promised that Article 16 will be invoked. The government said a year ago the criteria had been met to invoke it. We really need to get on to this, because I would say that things in Northern Ireland are very unstable. The elections are coming. There is very unlikely to be an assembly again formed if the protocol is still in place. We can't have the protocol and the Belfast Agreement. So it has to be one or the other. And I think most people realise that the Belfast Agreement's much more important than the protocol.
Yes, I mean, a group of unionist politicians, as you well know, Kate, challenged the protocol in judicial review proceedings, claiming that actually it was unlawful.
Yes, I'm one of those, actually.
Exactly, so you well know. But you actually argue in that judicial review that it conflicted with the 98, the Belfast Agreement, and actually going a lot further back, the Acts of Union. But the court rejected that challenge on all grounds. So how can actually unionists sat there at home in NI today, Kate, what can they actually do about this?
Well, of course, we always saw the courts in Northern Ireland as the way to actually get to the Supreme Court. This is a United Kingdom issue. You know, it affects the whole of the United Kingdom, the fact that the union has, as the court said, it has been subjugated. But what it said, it was suspended. They were suspending that aspect of it. And of course, the crucial thing about the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was the principle of consent, that Northern Ireland would remain part of the United Kingdom until the people of Northern Ireland had decided otherwise. What we're seeing is a salami slicing of that relationship between Northern Ireland, and what the court said was that really was fine. Go ahead and do that. That wasn't actually affecting the status of Northern Ireland, as long as we weren't actually being handed over to the Republic of Ireland, which is a complete and utter nonsense, and one that we will definitely be taking to the Supreme Court. But more importantly, if the principle of consent can go over something like this, and nobody in Northern Ireland was asked did they want to keep the protocol or did they want the protocol, then what else can be done? And every time something new comes from the European Union, we will have to comply with it. I think the government do know that it's not sustainable. It's just that they have to have the leadership and the courage to actually say to the European Union, nonsense this is, we've got to renegotiate this, we've got to get a way that is normal and sensible and is not just punishing us because we chose to leave the European Union.
Well, Kate, we'll have to get you back on to keep us up to date on that. Thank you very much. That was Kate Hoey, former Labour MP and now independent peer. Now on the Real Britain podcast that we'll have out tomorrow, we'll have lots more discussion about issues in Northern Ireland, so keep an eye out for that. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Still to come, we'll be talking about online safety laws that were introduced in Parliament this week. Do they go far enough or too far? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Simon Pusey.
Good afternoon, it's 2:34. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukraine's presidential advisor says front lines have practically frozen because Russia doesn't have enough troops to make further advances. Meanwhile, Mariupol's city council says thousands of Ukrainians have been taken by force across the border to Russia. Fighting is still said to be going on in the city after an art school where around 400 people were taking shelter was also bombed. There's still no word on casualties, but the city council confirmed that the building was destroyed and there were victims under the rubble. 19-year-old Sabita Tawani has been named as the teenager who was murdered in central London yesterday. Detectives are now searching for 22-year-old Meher Marouf, who they believe was in a relationship with her. Police say he's a Tunisian national who isn't a student and has no fixed address. 6 people have been killed and 10 others seriously injured after a car ploughed into a crowd in Belgium. The incident happened in a small village around 30 miles south of the capital, Brussels. Police say the vehicle was driven at high speed into a group of carnival performers who were preparing for a parade. 2 people have been arrested. The incident is not thought to be terror-related. Millions of people in England will begin to be offered COVID booster jabs this week. The NHS says the vaccine will be able to care home residents, those over 75 and immunosuppressants aged 12 and over. 5 million people are expected to be given the jab. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Real Britain with Darren Grimes will be back in a short moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, hey, it's been a busy weekend of sport with the final of the Rugby Six Nations, of course, Premier League football, horse racing and the start of the Formula One season kicking off with the Grand Prix. So much going on. Joining me now to talk through all of it is Neil Moxley, the chief sports writer from the Sunday People. Hi, Neil. Good to be with you again. Neil, can we start with football now? There are 3 FA Cup quarter-finals taking place today. Chelsea have beat Middlesbrough. A solid performance there yesterday, would you say?
Absolutely. Darren, good afternoon, by the way. Yeah, it was job done as far as Chelsea were concerned. They went 2 goals up in half an hour and pretty much decided that was going to be that. So in the last hour or so, I think Crystal Palace have booked their place in the semi-final by beating Everton. And later on this afternoon, we've also got Manchester City and Southampton facing off, along with Liverpool and Forest.
Neil, don't you talk to me about beating Everton. That is rubbing salt in my Newcastle United-shaped wound. It really, really is. On the subject, though, of Chelsea, multiple bids have gone in. We saw that deadline passed. What do you think's going to happen there? What happens next? How long is this process going to go on for? It's quite a big club to buy.
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. There's obviously the bids have gone in with the New York investment house Rain Group. I expect them to be sifting through the respective offers this weekend and making recommendations to the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, as to their preferred bidder. Obviously, the bidders themselves have got to do due diligence on the football club to make sure everything's in order. That you would expect they'll be throwing all sorts of cash at that to make sure the lawyers are rushing that through as quickly as they possibly can. And then the preferred bidder will have to undergo the owners and directors test at the Premier League. And the chief executive, Richard Masters, has said it could take the fastest they've done one is about 10 days. Whether or not they beat that record would be surprising, as you well know, being a Newcastle United supporter, that owners and directors test of the Saudi group took a little bit longer than 10 days. But given the circumstances we sadly find ourselves in today, you can expect that to go through a lot faster.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking though of the Saudi takeover of Newcastle United, how much do you think we're going to see more of this where the state has a direct role in actually saying yes or no to these sort of takeovers? How much do you think we're going to see a sort of politicisation of, especially after, Russia and all the rest of it? We're now looking at this a lot clearer, it seems to me.
I think it's a litmus test, Darren, to be honest, regarding the fan-led review that Tracy Crouch has actually put into place, whereby football clubs will be given licences to be run. That was going to be handed down by an independent regulator. Obviously, in this instance, the government have taken that out of any independent regulator's hands. But going forward, should one be enacted? But going forward, I think you're going to see a lot more of it. Obviously, it was heavily politicised when the Saudis took over Newcastle United. And indeed, there's another Saudi group interested in buying Chelsea. But from my own perspective, I think just looking at it dispassionately, I think the government are going to want to say what they would consider to be a safe pair of hands, and will try and steer away from as much controversy as they possibly can over the preferred bidder that takes over at Chelsea.
Well, we'll talk more about that in the weeks and months to come. But the Six Nations, of course, France beating England to win the Grand Slam. Ireland coming in at a reasonably close second place there. What went on?
Yeah, well, France basically won the Grand Slam last night in Paris. They beat England. It was a hard-fought game as they normally are between the two. But from an England perspective, they just lacked a bit of nous and a bit of cutting edge. And you always felt watching the game, Darren, that the French had a little bit more in the locker. And obviously, they were, despite their late nerves, they were able to see it over the line. Obviously, the World Cup is taking place next in France, and obviously it's coming to the boil very nicely for them. England find themselves at a little bit of a crossroads under Eddie Jones. There's still 2 years before it takes place. There's plenty of time for them to get some forward momentum, but clearly after 2 wins out of 5 matches, it wasn't ideal.
Yeah, and then the first Grand Prix, of course, of Formula One season starting in Bahrain. That's a long season. Who do you think is going to come out ultimately victorious at this? I don't want to sort of try and get you to be Mystic Meg for a moment, but what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, it was very interesting, wasn't it, in the qualifying? I think that Charles Leclerc is on par with Ferrari. And obviously, Darren, as you know, Mercedes have pretty much ruled the roost the last 6 or 7 years in terms of the constructors. Lewis Hamilton finds himself 5th on the grid today. But Mercedes have found themselves in this position before where they've been caught a little bit cold. There's always little technological developments every single season. And normally they're pretty good at playing catch-up. So to be honest with you, I'm grateful for the fact you haven't asked me to look into my crystal ball, because I can't possibly predict an outcome, I'm afraid.
I won't ask you, I promise. You'll have your own column then, Sunday People, soon, won't you, predicting people's futures. Now, the UFC Fight Night event was held here in London at the O2 Arena last night. There were 7 wins in total for British fighters, and the UFC president, Dana White, said that he hopes to come back to the UK later in the year. It seems like the UK is actually, as far as the UFC is concerned, a real hotbed of talent for mixed martial arts now, Neil. Is that right?
It is, absolutely, Darren. You know, obviously the country's got a very proud sporting heritage in boxing. And all I can say is that in terms of interest, every time that that stories go up on the Daily Mirror's website, obviously the Sunday People's part of that organisation, the interest in it is reflected in the amount of click-throughs we've got. I can't say it's a sport with which I'm particularly conversant, I have to be honest with you. But in terms of the interest, it's clearly there. And given the fact that it was such a success last night, I think Dana White is well placed and very wise to be coming over here and putting on more shows.
Yeah, that's interesting. One to watch for sure. Neil Moxley, Chief Sports Writer for the Sunday People, thank you very much for your time. It's now 2:44 and time for scrap, reform or keep. Now, we're looking today at the online safety bill, which has been in the news last week, well, actually a lot longer than last week, but just last week it went through Parliament, and what the ins and outs are of this new online safety bill. Does this bill actually achieve some good, or will it cause more problems than it's worth? Joining me to discuss, I'm delighted to say, is Victoria Hewson, Head of Regulatory Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Darren.
Now, Victoria, can I start by asking you, you've got some concerns about this bill, I think that's fair to say. Nadine Dorries, the Secretary of State at the Department for Culture and Media and Sport, she would argue that actually the internet right now is a wild west, and all that the government are doing here is taming that wild beast to ensure that kids are safe online and you're safe from consumer fraud and things like that.
Yes, the Wild West cliche, I'm afraid, is just incorrect. The Law Commission did a big piece of research on this. The very respected independent body, the Law Commission specialist lawyers, did a big piece of work just a couple of years ago trying to assess the laws that apply in the offline world as against the laws that apply online, and they found that the laws are equally applicable online as offline, and in fact, if anything, online world, social media, e-commerce is more heavily regulated already than sort of real world offline engagements. What this bill is all about really is that the government doesn't like what people are saying to each other on social media. It doesn't like some of the search results that people can find on social media, and it wants to enlist the tech giants to act as the intermediaries of the government and the intermediaries of Ofcom to start filtering and censoring content.
What I'm really worried about is the idea that what we're doing right now is saying to Nick Clegg, now, you know, top cheese at Facebook, what we're saying is, here you are, matey, here's a load of excuses, really, to clamp down on speech that might be dissenting voices. It could be on lockdown, it could be on a whole host of issues in the name of tackling so-called disinformation. Now, my disinformation is going to be somewhat different to what Nick Clegg deems to be disinformation, isn't it?
Well, I think that's right. And in some ways, it's actually even more worrying than that, because a lot of these so-called harms are going to be defined by the minister, by the Secretary of State in power at the time. And, you know, obviously at the moment, Nadine Dorries thinks that's great because it's her. But, you know, she's not, we, you know, Conservatives or whoever you vote for, you're not always going to particularly agree with what these particular politicians consider to be harmful at any one time, especially when it comes to things like misinformation. And you mentioned Nick Clegg there. I think the really interesting thing here is that, you know, we've talked a lot, I think a lot of the debate has been around Facebook posts and also private messages are in scope for this, but also your search results, your Google search results are going to have to be censored by Google in order to essentially to protect themselves from being liable under this bill for fines or even from their managers being sent to prison. Now, you know, these tech giants are going to look after their own interests. And if that means they're going to have to filter and cut content from search results and monitor your private messages, and censor your Facebook post in the middle of a discussion, they're going to do that to protect themselves, and they're going to err on the side of caution to do so.
Yes, and that raises the concerns by David Davis, who said actually that this bill risks free speech. Is this just a form of soft censorship? And actually we're arming... There could be indeed Nadine Dorries, let's not forget, before she was Secretary of State, Nadine Dorries liked to air her opinions on Twitter. Could this come back to bite her in the bottom?
Well, quite frankly, Darren, I wouldn't even repeat on a family show the particular tweet by Ms Dorries that you're referring to. So there is a certain amount of hypocrisy there. The Secretary of State, the government, claim that free speech, freedom of expression, is protected explicitly under the bill. And there are indeed particular clauses in there that talk about journalistic content being exempted, content of democratic importance, as they define it, being exempted or protected, and some sort of rather soft duties to take freedom of expression into account by the platforms when they're doing this work that the government wants them to do. But for me, that's a tell by the government. The very fact that they have had to put special protections in place for journalism and content, political content of democratic importance, that's an admission that everything else is actually under threat here, because if free speech wasn't under threat, they wouldn't have had to put special protections in place for particular classes.
So what are these protections saying then? Are they saying that a journalist has a right to freedom of expression online, but your average Joe on Twitter or Facebook doesn't?
Essentially, yes. Regulated journalism, which in itself is a rather worrying turn of events that this government was supposedly opposed to, but they're actually bringing in press regulation by the back door here, will be sort of have an elevated position with special rights and protections. And the average conversations by you and me and our average Google searches and web searches will not be given that special level of protection.
So then to go back to that question I posed at the start there, are you saying scrap, are you saying reform, or are you saying keep? Presumably not keep.
Definitely not keep. I'm saying scrap. The bill as it stands is going to be a disaster. It's 250 pages long. The government even admits it's going to cost £2.5 billion to implement.
Wow.
24,000 businesses are in scope of this, at least. They've got to scrap this. And
how many hires at the regulator?
Oh, Ofcom is going to be really empowered by this. Ofcom's building up a massive power base here as the regulator of speech. They will get to decide, actually, what counts as due protection of free speech by the platforms here. It'll all be in their codes of practice. We need to go back to a kind of regime here that won't infantilize people, that won't embed fragility in the idea of harms and psychological harms and safety just because you've read something that upsets you.
Yes.
That all needs to go.
But then what would you say, though, to the parts of the bill where people say, well, I am worried about what my child's seen on Instagram, on TikTok, things like that. I am worried about these fraudulent scams online, because a lot of people are getting them and they're getting more and more complex, actually. They're getting quite believable. Do you actually think that those parts of the bill should remain?
I don't really. I think the new laws about fraud and fraudulent adverts have clearly been added in last minute. The bill wasn't supposed to deal with that at all, but there's been lobbying and pressure from activists. So now that's been bunged in a way that remains to be seen how that's going to work. There's already laws against fraud and, misleading advertising and so on. So I think, as with a lot of this, there just needs to be better resourcing of the investigation and enforcement of existing criminal offences, rather than manufacturing a whole load more new criminal offences that the police are already struggling to keep on top of what they've got.
Well, Victoria Hewson, given that it's almost guaranteed, isn't it, to pass through Parliament, we're in for one hell of a ride here if all you say is...
I actually have a little bit more hope now, because I feel like the bill has got so big and so unwieldy that it might actually collapse under its own weight here.
Well, there we are.
Let's see if our MPs do their duty.
Indeed. A new mystic Meg here, not Neil Moxley. Thank you very much, Victoria Hewson, Head of Regulatory Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Now, folks, it's 2:52 there, and next up, we're going to go to Campus Clash We've seen the backlash and the controversy surrounding positive discrimination in workplaces, and now it's time to actually look at whether or not we need these diversity policies, I think. Or are these diversity policies just absurd? That's what I reckon. Let's scrap the whole lot of them. To discuss further, though, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Ryan Bell-Morley, a trainee teacher who disagrees that diversity politics are absurd, and Jake Scott, PhD student in political theory at Birmingham University, who does agree with me that it's absurd. Jake, why do you agree with me here that these policies are just absurd and frankly patronising?
Well, if we begin with the topic of education, the best work on this produced in the last few years is Heather McDonald's The Diversity Delusion, in which she points out that diversity policies actually damage the prospects of those they're meant to help. So, taking the example of Ivy League schools in America, McDonald shows that affirmative action pursued on the crude basis of physical characteristics fails to take into account the socioeconomic background of the applicants. And what this means is that poor students, who admittedly are predominantly black in America but predominantly white in Britain, enter schools with a higher standard of expectation and rigour than they're used to, because the deprived areas that they're from have such poor schooling that they're not prepared to meet those high standards. As a result, the dropout rate amongst poor students is phenomenally higher in top schools. And if the students actually went to schools that they were probably more suited to, they would perform a lot better. The graduation rate's a lot higher, the achievement rate's a lot higher, which sets them up better for life. This is just as true in Britain. We fail to account for the real determinants of social performance, school performance, such as strong and reliable family networks, and focus on crude categories such as sex and race. So that's broadly where I stand with regards to that.
Ryan, why do you disagree then? All of Jake's remarks there were quite, I think, justifiable, weren't they?
To a degree, I understand where he's coming from with some of the points. However, I would say at its basis, when discussing this statement, diversity policies are absurd. We've got to take into account that at their core, diversity policies are there to eliminate discrimination and to accommodate cultural differences. And I don't believe. Therefore, to argue that these policies are absurd is to suggest that discrimination is no longer an issue in our society.
Well, Jake, can I let you come back to that? Are you fundamentally saying that you actually believe that discrimination doesn't exist in modern Britain?
It depends on the style of discrimination that we're talking about. If you want to look at the Sewell report, which came out very recently, which is phenomenal, Tony Sewell basically concluded that systemic racism is not a problem in Britain. I'm not suggesting that racism doesn't exist, but rather that the systemic presence of it is negligible. The real discrimination, broadly speaking, is against white working class boys.
Ryan, briefly, please, if you just can, if you come back to that, very briefly.
So, I mean, briefly, I think definitely there's discrimination between white working class men. For sure. I hold my hands up. I'm one of them. I've experienced it myself to a degree. Even my accent, where I'm from, you come down south, it's different. But to argue that's the only or predominant issue that we face today, I think that in itself is absurd.
Well, Ryan, I like your accent. So Ryan Bell-Morley there, trainee teacher, and Jake Scott, PhD student in political theory at Birmingham University. Thanks very much for your time. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. The show's on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. But for now, I'll leave yous with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry and clear for many, though it will chill off after sunset. Let's take a look at the details. Firstly, in the far southwest, there'll be some more cloud around here this evening, and perhaps even the odd spot of rain, but that cloud will keep temperatures up. Over to the east, and a clear, calmer end to the weekend, though in any rural areas it will start to feel pretty chilly around dusk. Moving back to the west, and in South Wales, there'll continue to be hardly a cloud in the sky tonight, chilly here as well. Next now to the Midlands, where you can see the odd spot of fog and mist developing this evening, but otherwise a clear and cool end to the day after a sunny-filled weekend. Now moving further east, and there will be more cloud across northeast England this evening, and in coastal areas a chance of some very light rain, though inland it will also be pretty chilly. Whizzing over to Scotland now, chilly here, especially in the breeze